you mind introducing yourself for the audience, please?
Okay, well, my name is Peter Van Dyck. I'm a painter. I live in Philadelphia, and I studied painting at the Florence Academy of Art a long time ago, probably 1997 to like 2002, 98 to 2002. It was a long time ago. And then I moved back to Philadelphia and started making paintings here in Philadelphia, and I've been here ever since. Shown paintings in galleries and all that, but I'm not I'm not sure that matters very much in my mind. So, um, and I do a lot of teaching, and I like to teach. It's pretty much my story. Not much more
Excellent.
than that.
Well, the gallery thing might be important actually, because we do like to discuss that later on. But
Hmm.
for now, I'm interested in the teaching aspect. Is that in person or is that both in person and online?
Well, it's both now, but it's primarily for I've been. I think I just finished my 20th year at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, which is unbelievable. And so, I mean, almost all of that has been in person. And but I do. Okay, I would say about every year I probably do maybe two or three online classes. But I'm teaching, or I have been teaching during the regular school year at the Pennsylvania Academy, and doing workshops. That circuit, doing the workshop circuit around the country and stuff.
Hmm. And is it since the pandemic you've started teaching online, or was it before that?
Yeah, no, it's just since the pandemic. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And is there any advantage to online teaching that you don't get in person?
For me or for them?
Either, I suppose. I'm interested to know about any of, because I can only think of two, so I'm keen to see if you've got anything.
Well, I think the one that's really beneficial is the ability to describe, visually explain concepts very, very easily. And that's stuff you could do in the classroom if you had a monitor and all that stuff, but I'm not like, I don't know, we don't do that, or I don't do that. So I have found that by taking a student's painting, an image of the painting, and loading it into Procreate, I can make modifications at will. And I think that you can make adjustments to the painting and explain concepts. It's so easy, and I think people understand it so much more when you can show them just that quickly. I mean, you couldn't do that on their painting, just in terms of how long it would take for you to mix up the color and all that stuff. And if you say to somebody, what if that whole shadow was much lighter, and you just try it, and of course, it's not the painting. You're not like changing. I mean, there's so many other things that's going to make a difference in the painting, but a lot of the things that I consider to be fundamental to the success of the painting, in terms of how you understand the grouping of values and colors and form, and yeah, and the explanation of form and space, a lot of that can be communicated without. It can be communicated digitally pretty well, I think. Um, so that's good. That's great. But the thing that really makes it hard is that I think learning painting is 99.9% painting, and I prefer a class that is less about the transmission of information, and one that's more about practice and coaching, more or less, because I just don't think there's that much to there's not that much information to share. If it was about information, we just write a book. And when you're in a Zoom class, at least I feel this mandate to be talking all the time. I have to be just like delivering what they call content, I believe. And that's exhausting. I just don't have that much to say. I mean, I'll think of something to say, but mostly, until you see somebody's work, there's very little to say about painting. I mean, and so I prefer the in person classes for that reason. It's a lot more like going to an actual practice for a sport or something than just sitting there and playing on the whiteboard or whatever.
Yeah. So theory is only a very small percentage of the actual understanding.
Well, that's a good question. Well, I mean, I think that the way you understand and the way you theorize about what it is that you're doing, um, it's only relevant as it relates to the practice. And I think you can talk about ideas and theories, but they all have to come from the practice. The practice justifies the theory, you know, and not the other way around. And that's where I think people can get kind of backwards. They try to make a theory that makes sense in some other world. But if you ever paint, you just know painting has its own physics to it. You know, it's just so I love talking about painting. I love theorizing about painting, and but I never read a book about painting in my life. I mean, I wouldn't even know, like, I wouldn't want to. I mean, but so anything that I'm talking about is just reflecting on making a lot of paintings, you know. And I think that I think that's really gotten turned on its head in education in general. It's like maybe it's because when you commodify education and you make it something that you're selling, then well, what are you selling? Well, okay, if I can't sell you just time for you to paint. Like, how do I charge you for your practice? You know, and so it becomes about information, and there's just not that much information. You know, it's anyway. That's my tirade about that.
No, that's interesting because to offer counterpoint, I would like to ask about when you're not painting, is there the non-painting time, does that contribute to your art making in a way where you either thought about the painting you've made or you're thinking about painting when you're not actually practicing or just walking around seeing in paint, seeing the world in paint? Is
Yeah.
that a contribution to the art making?
Oh, yeah. You never get to separate. I mean, at least in my mind, all of the things, all the components of your life are just in one big cauldron. I mean, maybe that's not the same for everybody, but I just can't. I can't separate them, and I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say I'm pretty much always thinking about painting, and a lot of that is because I'm very worried about painting. And that's not a good thing at all. But I'm very worried about. I'm constantly anxious about my work, basically. Like that's I just live in a perpetual state of anxiety about whether I'm doing anything good or if I'm worth anything, or you know, and so that because of that, I think I'm always I'm prone to thinking about it more than probably your average human being. Um, because I think that, and again, maybe this isn't the same for everybody, but for me, it's like it's the way I kind of understand who I am, like, and it's the activity with which I identify myself, and um, so you know, it for a lot of people, I think it would see you painting, and you could be just despondent. I mean, just so upset and so depressed, and the common reaction to that is, oh my God, like it's like a painting, it's just one little thing. And for me, it couldn't be more different. This is absolutely everything to me. It's like all of the other stuff that comes on top of that in terms of, you know, whatever, you know, you have going on, with the exception of your family, I would say. Um, all of that is built on top of a foundation of kind of, maybe it's self-respect that you're looking for, of painting, and that's not the icing on life for me. That's like the foundation of my identity, for better or for worse. I don't think it's a good thing necessarily, but it's the way it's kind of played out. So that's all to say that I think about painting all the time.
And then is the anxiety partly, does it sound like you're the need to make a contribution, with your work? Is it...
Um, it's I think not so much. I mean, I think that I have a kind of religious conviction that um, that the things I think are wonderful, the paintings and the music that I think are wonderful, that that is that to participate like in that practice effectively or well, or to make something, I don't know what to call it other than to make something wonderful, is just self-justifying. And I guess my anxiety is about whether I'm capable of doing that. And I don't know, it's a silly, stupid question, stupid thing, but it's like, am I okay? Like, is this okay what I'm doing? Like, is this dignified? Like, and it's not about, because you can have all the accolades in the world, and it never gets more complicated than, do I like what I'm making? And all of those other things are completely irrelevant if that's not the case. And so that's one of the things about the galleries, and I just put no stock in, not that that's not a good thing, but it doesn't affect how I feel about my work. So I think that's the anxiety. The anxiety is that I want to be good at it, and I have spent my life so far, and I think it's probably, I don't foresee me doing something else. I have spent my life trying to make something wonderful, I guess. It sounds so trite when you say it, but it's not more complicated than that. Trying to make something that does for somebody else and does for myself what the paintings that I love do. And it's just not more complicated than that. The rest of it's just nonsense.
And did this start postgraduate, or was it before that?
Oh, I've always been like that. I mean, I've always been, I should say, I've always, and I searched for an activity or an interest or a practice to put my energy into, to identify myself with, and to be a forum in which you play out your growth as a person. Maybe it's the place where you demonstrate your creativity. It's the place where you demonstrate your sense of poetry. It's the place where you demonstrate your sense of courage or lack thereof. All of these things. And so your painting simply is the statement of that about you, you know? And so I always wanted that. I mean, when I was younger, I looked for it in sports and things like that. And I wasn't very good at sports. Not that I wasn't very good at painting. I'm not very good at painting, but I think that I guess I kind of had the intuition that no matter how good you are at that is a short game. And if you plan to live past 30, like, you better think of something that's going to last longer. And how could you let that thing that defines you, how do you retire from that? You know, like, what would you do? And the great thing about painting is that, or one of the great things about painting is that you retire when you die. Like, that's pretty much it. I mean, there are not a lot of situations that could make it completely impossible for you to do a little drawing, even. You know what I'm saying? So that, that was always important to me. And the other thing about painting, I think, is that in terms of autonomy, is that it doesn't require anybody else's cooperation. It would be hard for me to be in a band, for example. As much as I love music, I mean, music is the best thing in the world. But I can't imagine having to have other people have input on any of this. I would just be too, I don't know. I want to be a tyrant in my little world.
Is it ever, do you ever consider it to be unattainable? This
This thing?
Yeah.
I mean, I tell myself that, I think. I tell myself that it doesn't matter what I do, it will never be what I want it to be. And I guess probably true. I think sometimes you feel like you get closer than others. And I would imagine that the people who I admire were never really like, yeah, there it is. And I don't know, I have this basically this moving goalpost where, you tell yourself, if I could just do that, like I will never worry about this again. And then eventually you do that. And that's not enough anymore. It's like, yeah, well, okay, but what about that? And so you just move the goalpost, or I do all the time. And that can be the thing that keeps you propelled, but it's a source of a lot of distress too. So yeah, I think in some way it's unattainable, which is just to say that satisfaction is unattainable. And I think that's probably true.
Yeah, yeah. For what it's worth, I think your work's undeniably beautiful. I was immediately drawn to it, and that's why I reached out to you to be on the podcast, is that it's
Well, thanks.
fantastic work in its color, its composition, its style and application. I think it's just really incredible work, wall to wall from your all your Instagram feed and your website. It's amazing. So um, part of me thinks that it might be worth going down the route of discussing if there's any rules that you either abide by or consciously break in order to satisfy this kind of need to search out the beautiful in your own work.
Um, do you mean like technical rules or rules of practice or philosophical rules or
I mean more technical rules initially. That's the first question.
no, I don't. Well, okay. There are some things that I just think I'll never try. I don't think I'll ever. I don't think I'll ever paint a circular painting, for example. You do. I'm confined, I would say, to rectangular, flat images made of paint, and I don't play with the possibility of venturing outside of that. So that is a kind of a rule. Maybe just by when I look back, I think that's just a confine that I've decided to stay within. You know, so that's other than that. Any rule that I have, I don't mean to have. And that's in fact developing, I think, a lot of, for me, growth in painting is always about sort of rooting out some stupid rule that you have about what you can and can't do. And I have to think really hard to do that. I have to kind of think kind of analytically to ask myself, wait, okay, like why? I look at paintings just all the time. I look at the paintings I like and paintings I'm not even that fond of, and I think, okay, wait, now that person's a human. I'm a human. This is possible, and what is this person doing that? It's almost always, what is this person doing that I am not allowing myself to do? And that has unlocked. That's been the thing that's unlocked stuff for me. So it's been a constant shedding of rules, really. And it's hard to, at least for me, I'm a very, I guess, not restrained. I don't know. I'm just I'm not a very adventurous person. So I think I took on rules, maybe too much. But when you go to the question of this making something that is just wonderful, then it's just whatever it takes, whatever it takes. And so, no, I don't think I have any technical rules.
That's good. So what is something which you saw someone doing that you yourself hadn't tried, that you were then
Oof.
pushed to do because of seeing someone else either
Yeah.
successfully do it or just experiment with that practice?
Right. Okay. So I would say the biggest one has probably been keying paintings outside of a unified, like outside of a studio environment. And because what was the real eye opener for me coming back from Florence to the States was being exposed to a generation of representational painters in the States who were under the radar. They weren't atelier type painters, but they had everything that I love in painting. And they were addressing the world that they had. And I would see, see people painting, they were making paintings, or I just didn't think you could make a painting out of that, you know? And so one of the biggest things for me has been how the I don't want to say rules, but the confines of a unified light studio. Because if you're concerned with painting objects, with the description of objects, it does benefit to illuminate them in a certain way, right? In terms of like emphasizing whatever the local color is and to best flatter the volume of the thing. But I'm not really concerned with describing objects. And so once you're outside of that, that model of light, which it is, it's a kind of a model, it's a way of thinking about light that a lot of those rules about keying it just will screw you up so badly if you try to work like that. And so the enormous range of interpretations for the way a painting is keyed and organized from a value point of view, and the impossibility of doing something quote unquote accurate is immediately apparent when you step out of that studio. You realize that wouldn't make it doesn't even make sense to talk about it. So that's been the biggest technical thing for me. And I still can't believe how light you have to paint, say, the interior of a room against the exterior, even though the exterior is so much lighter than the room. I mean, it's still for me hard to believe, because if you come from a sort of North Light, unified light, 19th century or Baroque lighting idea, you basically would, in order to get this strong value contrast between the outside and the inside, you basically just paint the inside black. Like, I mean, and it just doesn't work. I mean, and nobody ever did that. Nobody ever made a successful painting like that. So it's just, yeah, there's just such an enormous, infinite possibility when you're doing something like that.
So is there am I to understand that within the tonal value range,
Mm-hmm.
you will then keep your key levels within certain parameters, so your lightest light or darkest dark will be then controlled?
Yeah, I would say that I have developed a taste for what I would call high key, low contrast, maybe high focus and graphic painting. That seems to me to be the most aesthetically appealing thing, and the one that sort of comes to me most naturally in painting from life. So on average, the average key of the painting is, I try to keep it fairly high. I want to make a light painting, I think. And so that, like, you look at the thing on the wall and it's not a dark object. So I try, in general, that's a major thing for me, because the places where I paint, they don't feel dark. I mean, there's definitely versions of the key that could make them dark, but that does not feel right to me. So I try to keep the painting fairly high key, and then to make up for the loss of, I guess what you might call like punch that you get when you have very low contrast. I try to make up for that by painting in incredibly high focus, basically, because I think those two things they kind of play with each other. If you look at Baroque painting or 19th century painting, they have this very high value range, very high contrast, but it's a fairly diffuse, approach to edges. The thing kind of emerges from this cloud of darkness. So I find that I can maneuver most, limberly, I suppose that's a word, in that high key, low contrast environment, and painting things pretty much super sharp, no matter where they are. I mean, not everything necessarily, but you could have a building 10 miles away, and if you're painting like Sargent, who I love, you make it blurry, right? Because there's some idea that as you look at stuff, as it's further away, it's blurry. But you can paint that absolutely full focus if you keep the contrast very, very low. So that's been the game. That's the game I'm in, I think. And yeah, it is a particular thing. But I would argue also that painting a still life in a north light environment is a particular thing as well. It's not any more like true than anything else.
Hmm. Yeah, and unless I'm wrong, I feel as though I've seen you not necessarily play with soft focus, but with edges. Is that's still a factor that you implement in your?
Well, so I don't think about edges quite the way that I think people. I don't really think about edges. I think about interlocking shapes, and so you have these shapes of color, and I try to find places where the shapes of color can violate the borders of the object. You know what I'm saying? And not so much necessarily by blurring the edge between them, but by literally linking them, right? So you might call that, in a sense, a lost edge, but that's not really how I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about trying to find, as make the painting, trying to find and discover new or unforeseen shape possibilities. And again, I like the idea of sort of uniting forms, even at different depths, uniting different forms with a kind of single graphic shape. And again, you would say, well, that's you thinking about edges, but I don't see it that way really. It's just how do you fit the painting together, you know? And the other thing I think that accounts for some of the I guess what looks like fuzziness to me is I just paint over stuff a lot. And if I'm painting the outside against the inside, I might like cake the paint on the outside with a palette knife or something. And then in order to get it to, to make sure it presses all the way into the space, I might go a little bit further with the full intention of coming back and putting that other thing back in front of it. But I just don't. It just doesn't occur to me to do it again. And so you'll get this kind of gradual fusion across those things. But I don't think about it like I'm going to make that edge soft and that edge hard or anything like that, really.
But is that still a more recent experimentation of this interlocking shapes, or is it something you feel you've always played with the idea of?
I think it's something I've always played with. I think because that's actually strangely, I learned that at the Florence Academy, which would be, and you could, I'm sure that a lot of people would see this as a flagrant misinterpretation of what they were saying, but the fundamentals of the approach to drawing, at least when I was there, and as I understood it, were that you needed to assess what was in front of you in terms of a set of clearly structured and essentially well-designed flat shapes, right? And quote unquote accurate, which is, you can draw shapes that are better or worse at describing somebody's head, so in that sense, accurate, like trying to make shapes that were not just the most descriptive of and of the character or whatever it was that you're painting, but also, and this was always something that was actually hard to talk about, but they also had to be beautiful shapes, and the thing about that is that's a little bit verboten to talk about, I think, in some very structured schools, because you can't make rules for that. There's no rules for that. I couldn't tell you what you do is you always make an angle that has a little bit like this and a little bit like that. Like that's just not going to make any sense. So the difference between painters, I think, like you look at Holbein and you look at Sargent, these are two completely different senses of shape, basically. And I love them both. So I think what happened was I took that shape idea and and now I just guess I took it a little too literally. I don't know. I guess I must have had instinctively a taste for flat shapes, you know. Um, I mean, my teacher, the thing when I look at his work, the thing that, or one of my teachers, I guess probably the one that I think I learned the most from, or at least the one that I latched onto the most. Um, he was always, I think what I loved about his work, I couldn't have told you this at the time, was just by how he structured shapes, you know. Yeah, it looked like the person, fine. But, you know, if you look at a sergeant, I mean, yes, they look like a person, but it's his sense of design that makes those paintings. And not just the design like, oh, he put the head over there and there's a vase there. But I mean, the design of how the mouth, like the shape that makes of the mouth fits into the halftone that is on the chin and then drops into the shadow. The way that, like, there's just, that's what I call the poetics of painting. Like, that's where all the magic happens in painting. So, I don't even know what I was answering in terms of a question there, but I hope some of that made sense.
We have been working on something in the background.
We've had previous guests revisit the channel to give us additional content, everything from studio tours, sketchbook tours, talking us through the process of paintings and all kinds of additional treats, which you're exclusively going to see as a patron who supports the channel.
So by supporting us on Patreon, you help the channel keep going. There's a lot of work put into this, from the video editing to the sourcing of guests. So you really help us find those guests and to put the content out.
We have lots of content planned for the near future. So the links for that will be in the description of this video and in the description on the podcast channels. And otherwise, you can go on to Patreon and type in Painting Insights Podcast and support us that way. Thanks very much. Enjoy the video. If we're talking currently about the technical side of rules or not rules, or just, you know, then what would you say would be maybe philosophical rules or non-rules that influence your rules in any way?
So for me, the rule that I have now, and maybe this is a mistake, and I can't do it. I can't do it all the time. My rule is to enjoy myself, actually, for a number of reasons, but mostly I think that if you're going to spend your life painting, you better fucking enjoy, you better enjoy it. You better enjoy it. And I don't think, for me, that I don't think I do anything good or even remotely wonderful out of a position of anger or frustration or self-containment. I don't. I mean, I think painting for me is the ultimate expression of well, a lot of things are, like any kind of creative act is an expression of an irrational exuberance, you know, that you will into the world. And the fact that it's pointless makes it all the more essential. Like that's the thing that makes it worth doing in a weird way, because if it were some other motivation, and there's nothing, I mean, anybody who has like a gallery career and all that, that's terrific. I mean, I'm not knocking any of that at all, but for me, when I come down to it, if it had another motive, it wouldn't take all of my courage to do it. You know what I'm saying? And that's why the idea of painting depressed is absolutely, I cannot imagine how you would do that. I mean, that was what? You know? And so that is the thing I try to do, and I'm not particularly good at it. And pretty much every time I start working during the day, I'm incredibly agitated and anxious, and it takes me like a couple hours before I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm into this now. But that's my rule. And I hope I'll learn to follow it. And I give that advice because even for people who are in a sort of strict training environment, I think they have to find a way with as best they can within the confines of that environment and the rules of that environment, because you need to go through some kind of structured education. I really think you do within that to enjoy yourself. Because like I said before, nothing will replace experience in painting. So you've got to do a lot of painting, and you're not going to do a lot of painting if you don't like to paint, right? I mean, it's just that simple. And so, you know, in a way, I think learning how to do that is the thing that will make you the best painter, actually. I think it'll make you better than whatever they're telling you in school. I mean, it's just you painting with some good coaching, you know? So that's my one rules. I don't want to say have fun, but to paint in a way that makes you want to be painting, not to want to have painted. That's what most people think. It's like, I want to paint a portrait. Well, no, what you mean is you want to have painted a portrait. You know, then they suffer for like 5 hours. So anyway, that's it.
Well, with regards to enjoyment in the process, I found that some artists will say that it's the idea stage is where they find the most enjoyment, the generation of the marks, the sketching down, and then the rendering becomes more laborious and monotonous. And with other artists, they'll say it's the discomfort they put themselves in, so they always have to reinvent things and, you know, find that invention and discovery and spontaneity. Where is it that you find enjoyment in the process?
So I think initially, like just interacting with what I'm looking at in some way, not somebody who can generate a thought out of whole cloth. I probably could. I mean, if you told me to like draft up a figure, yeah, I guess I could. But to me, it would have absolutely no interest to it with whatever I make, because my concepts and my preconceptions haven't come into collision with the strangeness of reality. And so I love that period, especially when you're starting, when, you know, you've got, you just kind of, to me, it's like reality is like this, your tennis partner on the other side of the net, you know, it's like, that's what makes it fun. You know, you don't just hit the ball to nothing, you know? And so that's what kind of keeps you on your toes, at least for me. So I really enjoy watching the painting start to come together visually. I really enjoy drawing. I really enjoy looking at stuff really carefully. It takes me out of myself in a way. I would say every aspect of the painting I can enjoy, but I also don't paint really in stages, you know. And I think that's a reason that I can do that, is that, you know, I paint in a way where like I could, you know, put a person in there like halfway through the painting. I mean, you know, in the last day even, you know, because the trajectory of the painting, like I said, is not linear. And if you think about the steps of the process, you know, building on top of each other, yeah, my process is just one flat thing, you know. Anything might happen at any time. And that, to me, that makes it always potentially awesome, you know. And that's what leads you on. Like, he's like, hey, you know. So I enjoy that. Yeah. So in a way, the whole thing. But I think that when I'm most happy is when I feel like I'm kind of dancing with the world and sort of, you know, letting the world instigate my appetite for volume and space, and just kind of like just really sinking in. And I don't know why. There's something about not just, because it's not just looking at it. Like, you have to interact with it for me, right? I can look at this piece of paper on the wall here and notice that it's like a little bit off of plumb relative to the thing next to it. But just noticing that is not satisfying to me. I want to participate in that in some way. And like, I have to grab the brush and I have to do it, you know? So that is that's very engaging for me. and I feel like I get pulled into a world. Um, I mean, I would say I get pulled into the real world, you know, and it's so. I think that's my favorite thing. I don't love painting. I do a lot of painting on my work away from the model, away from the setup. And I can enjoy that a lot. It's a little harder because it's it brings an element of criticism to it that is not there when I'm sort of like fully in the nature thing. There's, you know, it doesn't have to, but there's a lot of like assessing, you know, and assessing messes me up a lot. You know, it gets me thinking, oh, this isn't good. What should I do? What should I do? And I'm not very comfortable there. So yeah, I prefer painting, like looking at the thing.
So how much will you do in situ compared to back at the studio with reference?
Um, so I guess I'm probably on site like 80% of the time. And then what I do is I'll take the painting back to the studio, and usually I put it upside down and work on it upside down. And I don't have any reference. I just think about first of all, I think about what I want for the painting, right? And and I look for opportunities that I didn't see. And a lot of it is just asking myself, when I was out there, I put this piece of color down because I intended to separate this form from that form, you know, by just, you know, and then you look at studio and go, I didn't do it though. Like that didn't work. So you have to actually do it. Like a lot of the time I'm just doing what I meant to do back there. And the reason for that is it's very hard to actually make a painting in space, in situ. That's the thing. For a number of reasons. It's incredibly difficult because your painting is about this far from your face most of the time. Like if you're standing in a doorway, you've got a painting that's like, you know, 3 feet and your nose is touching it practically. And you've got an artificial light coming from one spot. It's like right above the canvas. So it's really, really bright, really, really warm over here. And it's so dark down here that you can't tell what the hell's going on. And so it's impossible to get a real sense of what's going on globally in the painting. You paint by instinct. You know, you think when you're painting, like, all right, now I know that I'm going to want to paint that really, really light because there's so little light on the canvas down there. So you try to compensate for all that in the place. But for me, it's always like, oh, Jesus, that didn't work. Because the actual execution of painting, like like I said, it's very, very hard to do in place, depending on what your situation is. I mean, you can set up in less hostile spaces than I choose to, but that's a game usually where the things that are kind of the most interesting and exciting are the things that usually present the most annoying working situations, you know, and the most impractical ones. So that motivates you to try.
Would an example of that be you're painting off a bridge looking over what we'd call a motorway?
Sure.
It'd probably be a freeway for you. Is that an
Yeah.
example of what you mean? Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, I did a series of those bridge paintings, and yeah, when you're up there, you think, I mean, it's just like, how could you not paint? It's just such a cool spot. And that was I look at that and I think, oh my, do I have the energy to do that now? And yeah, that's a lot of work. You know, yeah, I had to haul the easel out there and then strap it down because it's incredibly windy on a bridge. And the painting is 4 feet wide. So you have to ratchet strap the easel to the railing and then into the ground and all this stuff. And actually, in order to paint that painting or any of those paintings, I had to stand on a stool in order to see over the railing. So, yeah, it's a lot of work. There's no way around it.
One of the things that struck me in that piece was the angle of either the barrier or the sign or something, which was, it looked almost wide angle. Was that a decision that you made back at the studio, or did that happen there? Because I assumed it was from a wide angle lens, but by the sounds of it, it isn't.
No. I mean, I don't use photographs, and not because I have a like sort of more ethical objection to it. I just don't think I could get any of what I'm after from a photograph. But the the thing that people I think generally refer to as wide angle or distortion, or that that is a way of thinking about, technically, of thinking about perspective that that accounts for the movement of your body and your head as you look around the space. And it's something that's it's not obvious if you're painting in the confines of a fairly small cone of vision. So, but I don't experience the world, or at least not the world that I want to paint, through a small cone of vision. The world, I don't know, makes me want to look more. So when you paint a lot more than you can see at once, you have to turn, and look this way. And every time you turn, you're creating a new perspective projection, basically. So you end up stitching those together as you look around, and that's what accounts for the effect of, it's basically like a view like down and then a view slightly more up. And so, it'll go like that. The vertical thing will go in at one point, and then by the time it achieves eye level, it's straight. And then by the time you look up again, now it's going like that. And so, and this is something you can experience very easily with a just simple sight measurement thing. Like if you stand in front of a long wall, whatever, 10 feet back, and you take something straight, like a ruler or something, and you hold it, you face the wall directly, and you hold it perfectly out in front of you with two hands so that it's not turning in space like that. So just as you would take any kind of sight measurement for an angle, and if you lower that down, when you're facing that wall, it will meet the ground plane absolutely flat. Like it will be straight. And then if you go like this, all of a sudden that's going to go like that. And then you go like this, and now it goes like that. And what you see is that essentially your experience of space is actually curved in a sense. I mean, and that's true. That's true on the back of your eye. Not that that matters, but your eye is the back of it is a very small section of a sphere. It's just so small relative to the overall size of the thing that you can mistake it for being flat. You know what I'm saying? But if you were to open that up, then the curvature would be less and less easy to ignore. It become harder to ignore that. And so that's what accounts for what I think people will call the bending. But the way I think about it is, because how that plays out is a result of how you imagine yourself to be looking around a space, right? And the bodily movements that accompany your looking. And that actually doesn't have a single interpretation, because there's no single way to look around a place, right? And so that what happens, I think, is as you construct whatever this interpretation of space is, you are embedding in the picture a kind of gesture to the looking, if that makes sense. So because every shift implies a movement of the viewer, right? Then the picture is creating a kind of movement. It's just in my crazy world. So in a sense, the painting has a sort of gesture embedded in it, but it's the gesture of the person looking at it, maybe more, if that makes sense. So that's sort of how I understand interpreting space based on a kind of expanded model of Renaissance perspective, more or less.
That must make it tricky when it comes to composition. When you first set up, surely you have to do a lot of this looking around in order to compose the piece from the first decision making.
Yeah. Okay. So it makes it very hard to map, I will say. It makes it very hard, especially when it's much it's a lot of space. It's incredibly hard to decide where to put things, right? I mean, because if you put a cup, 5 feet or 10 feet away from you, it's pretty I don't know, it's easy or it's easy, not too hard to make a quick visual assessment of its height to width proportion. But the wall in front of me is 3 feet away and 10 feet wide. I couldn't, for my life, I couldn't tell you what its visual proportions are like that. So that's very hard. But in terms of composition, what I do is I'm kind of think of a very simplified volume, right? And or maybe two simplified volumes. So if like that bridge painting, for example, I took an approach where it was like we have a curving plane of the bridge, and then a kind of undulating plane underneath it, right? And that is a thing that you can perceive if your attention is directed to it, right? I can say to you, imagine this and this, and you can look at it and go, oh, I see what you're saying, you know? And that's how that's how pointing things out works. Okay, so I kind of conceptualize that, right? And then I kind of try to draw that on the canvas, right? So I take this just the way that if you looked at a figure and I said, okay, imagine the shoulders going like this and the head going like that and the hips going like that, right? So you can kind of take that gesture on board and conceptualize it and then sort of apply it onto a piece of paper, right? And that's basically what I do. I decide what those simple big forms are, and they're simple, but they're specific. Okay, so they are, if you have a four-sided shape, a cubic volume, let's say, that you're trying to use to describe the location and orientation of a building, for example. Well, not just any cubic volume will do. It's a cubic volume of very particular proportions and at a very specific inclination and rotation. So the volume itself is simple but specific, and the specificity is really important to me. So I try to design these big pieces in a way that feels specific to my interpretation of their big character, and also in a way that fits on the canvas in a way that I like. And then from there, then you start to fight with the measurement and the mapping out of things. And that's a lot of, at first, that's a pretty heavy lift. That's why usually what I do is I do a little bit of that and then get frustrated and I start painting. And then I do that again and I move everything. So I'm in a constant paint, draw thing because this is the way it ended up.
That's amazing. I mean, I could ask you loads more questions, but I've kept you for quite a while. So what I want to do is move on, if I can, to your color palette. Do you have a set color palette? And if so, could you take us through what those colors are, please?
I could take you through what I'm using now for sure. So I use an underpainting white. This is I like to be able to paint like on top of my paint as soon as I can without it mixing in. And so when I started using this underpainting white, which is some kind of alkyd, I'm sure it's going to kill me, but I want to make a good painting. So, going to make concessions, right? And it dries ridiculously fast, like so fast that, you can't put too much out on your palette at once. So I use that. And as I make my way down the palette, in terms of generating the body of the mixture, I used to do that with lead. So if you use lead white is a very weak tinting strength, has very weak tinting strength. And so it ends up constituting a large part of the actual physical body of the mixture. So when I was using lead white, it was mostly made of that. When I stopped using lead white, I replaced that with, I started using raw sienna, burnt sienna, and some kind of usually like Payne's gray or blue black or something like that. So these were like earth colors that, the raw sienna dries pretty fast, which is nice. They were an earth triad, let's say, right? That were that could generate a lot of body quickly. So like I think almost all of my mixtures start with some big puddle of those three, unless it's a very particular, like a color somewhere, like, you know, way around the color wheel. But and then they get kind of modified by these other colors. So those other colors are like, I have each one of those red, yellow, blue in those earth colors, and then I have like a cadmium version of each of them. I use fake cadmium. They make this thing called cadmium-free cadmium. I mean, this is like, if anybody who has any, you know, scruples about technique will be absolutely horrified by what I do. But again, I will do anything to make this work. So so I use those kind of high chroma versions of the blue, yellow, and red, and then I have a bunch of like what I call kind of like cheater colors, like specialty colors that I use. I mean, like alizarin crimson. I think you can't paint without that, or some form of that. So I have, as I make my way down the palette, I have something called a brilliant yellow, which is like a Naples yellow. It looks like white added to yellow, and you could make it in a second if you wanted to, but I like to have it on hand. Cadmium yellow, raw sienna, and then I have like cadmium orange, burnt sienna, then a cadmium reddish kind of thing. And then as you go to like the cooler, that start to transition to like the cooler part of the palette. So from the you know, from the cadmium red, it starts to go to like the alizarin crimson there. And then I have this like pink called Radiant Red. It's made by Gamblin. That just basically, again, you could make this by just like, it took 2 seconds to mix it. And then it starts to go towards blue. I have like a what's that called? King's blue. It is a high key reddish blue, but it's only that color if you get it from Williamsburg. Williamsburg has a very particular color to it. The other colors, other companies, this is a lot darker. And then ultramarine blue, and then blue black or ivory black, or not ivory black, blue black or Payne's gray. And then we're almost at the end there. There's some greens. I have a radiant green, which is a whitish green. It looks like mint, basically, like a high key mint. And then I have a phthalo green because, well, I'll explain that in a second. Phthalo green, and then a permanent green, and then a green gold. And it sounds like a lot, but in the world of green, I see green always as kind of existing in a continuum of like a red green or a blue green. And on one side you have army green, right, which is the reddish green, and then on the other side you have basically mint, right, which is that blue turquoisey green. And so I have those different greens that kind of help me push the green in one of those directions. So the green gold is a very, very warm, it's a beautiful color. Permanent green is somewhere kind of in between. Phthalo, you know, if you're familiar with phthalo green, like if you have one tube of phthalo green, you never need to buy another one because it is so strong and it's so distinctive in its color. So that is, I call it the cilantro of painting because it's very particular, and you have to use it selectively, you know, because it's gonna really take over, you know. And then the radiant green is again one of those cheater colors, because all those radiant colors that I use to adjust high key mixtures. So if you're painting around in a high key, like up in the sky or something like that, or in like a light area, and you want to push, because I usually think about like just modifying color. I don't understand. I don't look at a color and see, that's that color. I don't even understand how that would work. But I think, oh, push it this way, push it that way. So when you're in high key, you can move it yellower with that brilliant yellow. You don't have to sink the mixture way down again and then put a white in. So they're just a nice, efficient way of modifying the color in the higher key. Yeah, that's it.
That's a very interesting palette. And you said it's your current palette. So is that grown, or is it shrank, or is it just altered?
It's just changed. I mean, the biggest change was when I stopped using lead. That made a big difference. And then I was using titanium, and then I sort of stumbled upon the underpainting white, and that sort of took over. But it's never, other than the shift from lead, there's never been a real significant break. And I've just brought things on board, and either they've stuck around or they have not. And yeah, so every now and then I try something new, and if it doesn't take, I just, it's all just from doing it and letting it kind of sort itself out.
Well, as I said earlier, I could ask you a lot more questions. If possible, I'll try and book you for a second episode for the next season if you're up for doing that, because I know I could quite easily go back through this talk and write down follow-up questions that I don't have the opportunity to do.
I would love that. Would be great.
So the last thing we really talk about is galleries, and because you've mentioned galleries a couple of times, I think that's quite an interesting topic. What's your experience been with galleries?
So when I came out of school, it was a weird time because the atelier world had not descended on the gallery scene yet. It was just kind of starting. So anybody who could paint, reasonably competently in a sort of 19th century realist way looked like, whoa, and so I was fortunate enough to capitalize on that when I came out of school. So I had what I guess looked a little bit like success with the work that I was making immediately out of school. And, I was showing that work, and I was selling it pretty well. I had a gallery. I had a gallery in New York, but I somehow kind of got absorbed into a gallery in New York that did really well. And I had a show there. And I thought I was kind of like, it looked like I was geared up to be successful. And that all collapsed for me as I became less and less able to make those paintings, and so that was, it was a pretty decisive break where I went from being in favor to being just absolutely, ignored, which is fine. I don't care. But so that was sort of my first phase, and I took that time and I just played with painting. I really tried to make the work that I wanted to make, and it was a very strange fit, very awkward for a little while, trying to work my way through that. And I think as it began to clarify a little bit more, and I started to find my footing with some of these other ideas, I started doing some more gallery things. But I never have looked poised for success in that way. I don't consider myself to be very successful in that respect. And I'm fine with that. It's yeah. To me, again, I got to make the paintings I want to make. And if here's the thing though, I do want people to, I'm hesitant to say buy them, but I do want people to have them. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know, maybe one day a gallery will come knocking, but I so far I've really preferred to sell things privately. It's been much more lucrative for me. And I'm not a good marketer either. I should get better at that, but that's been a much better experience. Not that the money is the point, but you do a lot better. And I'm not sure what a gallery really has for me, in terms of, I'm not sure they would do better than I would if I were a little bit more aggressive in promotion. But the one thing they do have is they have the space where people can actually see the paintings. So that's the thing. But there are co-ops and other places where you can put up a show if you want people to see your painting. I would do that. My wife and I had what I was probably my favorite show that I've ever been in at the college that she went to down in Alabama. And so that's a space. A lot of places have beautiful spaces. They're not galleries, but they have great spaces. So Yeah, it's very hit and miss now. I mean, if a gallery asks me for something, I'll happily send it to them. But I, because it's important for people to have the paintings, and this is where the gallery world I think was never going to quite work for me. Um, and painting is not like music in the sense where you can be pretty much anywhere on the socioeconomic spectrum and participate in the enjoyment of music. But painting is limited, at least painting, having a painting in your house is limited for the most part to a very, most people don't have the money to buy a painting, and that's a real problem for me, because I, I think I'm painting, I hope I'm painting also very much for people who don't know that they like painting. Um, that really matters to me. I mean, I consider myself to be like kind of a blue collar painter in that sense, Um, and so a lot of the time, if people contact me about buying a painting, mostly my approach is, well, yeah, okay, well, how much can you, I mean, like, what can you pay for it? Because, like, I mean, I'm much more interested in that the person wants it. And for some people, $500 is an enormous sacrifice. And for some people, $10,000, they wouldn't even notice that it was gone. And having sold paintings in the New York world, and this is not to knock the people that buy them, but you just think this doesn't really matter that much to them. Like, this is not a big deal. This is not going to improve their life dramatically. And I think about the paintings that I own from other people, and they improve my life dramatically. So I kind of have a kind of make an offer approach. And if I feel at the time like I can part with the painting for, that, I'm not like a dealer, a wheeler and dealer, but I just make a decision about, I don't know, I keep it, but I've sold big, ambitious paintings for hardly any money at all. I mean, because I thought that the person really wanted it. And it was just sitting in my studio. So I care very much about finding a home for my paintings. I want them to be in people's lives, and I want them to, and not for any charity reason. I mean, I'm not a nice person, but I think that I think that really matters to me. But they're not the people that go to galleries. Those are not the people who's not that I don't want that, but yeah, I mean, I really want to paint in a way that is legible to people who are not necessarily initiated into the art culture. Because, I mean, I don't particularly like art in that sense. I mean, no, I don't. The pretense around art is embarrassing as far as I'm concerned, and um, it's sort of philosophically confused, and a lot of the time very far removed from anything substantial. And so I want nothing to do with that. I mean, I like, you look at the painting, is it wonderful? That's all that matters. I don't care who did it. I don't care when they did it. I don't care how tall they were. None of that matters. The painting is the thing that the thing you make. That's the primary fact. That's what tells me about the person. The person doesn't tell me about the painting. The painting tells me about the person, right? And we've got that backwards these days. And so I believe in the kind of primacy of what you make, and it has to be wonderful enough to exist. I don't know how else to say it. So that's my approach to the gallery thing. And now I should throw out the caveat that I'm sure that all of my my sort of rejection in my philosophy around that is colored by having felt like I didn't, like I couldn't do it. Like having, I mean, there's a sense of like, definitely, I'm sure that subconsciously, having failed or failing in that realm, makes me not like it. Like that's probably the true story, but I think the other story is also partially true.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Well, it makes me wonder now, because if people do want to see your work in person, is there nowhere that your work is exhibited publicly currently?
I mean, I've been fortunate to have a few solo shows where I could see a bulk of the work. I don't have plans to do that right now, but I've shown work at a place in um, North Carolina, right? Recently, and that was a good experience. And I showed a bunch of paintings in New York at a place called the Sugarlift Gallery. That was a few years ago. I don't think I've done much since then. The place to see my paintings is in my studio, for better or for worse. Yeah.
So is that the understanding that people can reach out to you on your website or on Instagram to arrange a booking to come and see your work in this?
That's an open invitation. Yes. I mean, it's where I locate myself really. And not being somebody who has a really clear end goal. And again, I'm so sure that I don't have clear goals because I'm afraid I can't achieve them. But my life happens in the studio. I want the paintings to survive and carry in a domestic environment. That's another thing. Like I call myself a domestic painter because I don't particularly like to experience paintings in galleries or museums. That is not ever as moving for me. The way that a painting explodes your universe is the magical thing to me. The way it's the portal aspect of a painting, and I want to see that in a space. I want to see that in the space that somebody lives in, and that's really distinctly different than gallery painting in the sense that it's usually smaller. It has to be much higher key, I think, because you usually don't have very good light in a domestic spot, So there are some considerations to that. But if I am imagining a goal such as it is, that's what I'm imagining. Like I grew up with some paintings in my house just by chance, and they were these worlds on the wall that I just think, that's it. There you go. And that's where I want to put my world on the wall of somebody else's house, basically. And I want them to be moved by it in a way.
That's
my
wonderful.
goal.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And lastly, where should people go online to see your work and to support you?
First of all, the best way to support me is with compliments. I have just desperate need of affirmation at all times. So no. My website, it's Peter Van Dyck art.com. That's DYCK. Like Anthony Van Dyck, no relation, sadly. But and then I'm on Instagram, not very good about that. Otherwise I'm in Philadelphia. You can find me here.
Well, it's been wonderful talking to you. You've been very generous with your time. Thank you for being a guest on the podcast.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much.
Well, we hope you enjoyed that episode. If you can support the podcast by leaving a like or a comment down below, that would really be great. But what we'd really like is if you're able to leave a review on the podcast channels, wherever you listen to it or download it, because that helps us get spread around the internet so that more people have access to us and able to see what we're making.
Also, follow us on Instagram, and we'd really appreciate it if you like and engage with our posts. Help get the podcast better known. Thanks for listening.